In her novel Louisiana, Erna Brodber uses meta-narrative to thrust her reader and her fictional heroine, Ella Townsend, into an out-of-body, otherworldly experience that appears both factual and irrational. There's a deliberate confusion from the feigned sense of authenticity that Ella, the level-headed journalist turned medium, provides. This is a novel that studies cultural identity through the art of storytelling. The white man's art of anthropology neatly sorts and categorizes. It prioritizes specific experiences and ideals, attaching a certain class or status to the experience. Brodber, however, shows that the black man's anthropology is far beyond complex. It is hybridity and it is metamorphosis. The novel curiously begins in medias res with the added confusion of the overlapping voices of Lowly, also Louise, and Mammy, also Anna, as well as Ella's voice herself. As Ella investigates these voices, which mysteriously appear post-interview on her tape recorder, she is spiritually possessed and molded by the venerable sisters Louise and Anna into Louisiana. This is an internal transformation that manifests physically in her dress, her cooking, her career shift to respected priestess. Ella Townsend becomes Louisiana Cole, displaying her new self as an intersection of Southern Spanish, French Creole, and West Indian culture. For Louisiana, whose parents silenced the voices of their homeland and chose to mold to an Americanized collective, this is her first exposure to her heritage. In fact, her parents wanted their daughter to be a highly successful doctor in the big city, and they exhibit a sense of shame where she exhibits pride towards her role as a priestess in New Orleans. The reader is inclined to look at the archetype shift from Ella Townsend to Louisiana Cole as a type of journey, both physically and spiritually. She appears at first glance to be a Black woman who turns from her whitewashed lifestyle to embrace her Black roots in the South. I believe that this is a gross oversimplification of the Black experience and a pretty criminal attempt to categorize Brodber's intricate heroine. She is at no moment journeying from less Black to more Black, as if suggesting that successful Black Chicagoan journalists or doctors or lawyers, specifically women, are somehow neglecting their Blackness or their femininity. Rather, Ella's identity as a Black woman is reconstructed, at times without her consent, as she and her husband tap into the various cultural outlets that refract against the backdrop of white America. Mixed with magical realism of otherworldly spiritual possession, Brodber manipulates Ella beyond typical borders of character and category. She becomes 3, 4, and sometimes 5 characters in one body, even sacrificing her own physical body for connection to the spiritual body of her ancestors. In a moment where past and present mix inside Louisiana, Mammy's husband asks both women in one, on page 148, "Women, why can't you make quilts from scraps like other women?" As multiple identities and cultures mix inside of Louisiana, she makes quilts of people instead, uniting cultures and redefining the borders of self. In recalling her initial experience being possessed by Mammy, Ella calls the spirits of the women who possess her my teachers. She reveals that these teachers use her as a conduit to the past, and she exposes an amnesiac memory of the foundation of the U.S. upon the backs of slaves, which are her ancestors. However, this schooling by her venerable teachers goes far beyond learning about her ancestors' lost past. as she begins to physically inhabit the culture and personal experiences of her ancestors. She becomes this puppet made to speak for Loli and Mammy, and it can be at times a painful transformation, which explains the larger issue of cultural diaspora, amnesia, and hybridity. The tragedy of diaspora reverberates very strongly as the sound waves ripple through modern generations, quite literally speaking through Ella as Louisiana and documented by her tape recorder. While Louisiana, the girl, the character, is unbounded by time, she is also unbounded by space and able to tap into Black experiences all over the world that seem to be happening to her abroad self at the very moment she sits at home in the United States. She writes, she writes on page 123, when the boats to the West Indies sound off, they take me with them, and I am sitting right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Yet, searching the gravestones, stringing doopie beads, going into caves, eating mangoes and jackfruit there. The Black identity is far from cemented. In fact, it is fluid, ever-changing, and rooted in 100 different cultures across borders, and Brodber uses magical realism to illustrate this. The question of home is recurrent in the novel as Louisiana uncovers her parents' past and her ancestral roots. However, home, rather than being in the land of her ancestors, turns out to be the American South, where Ella is allowed to morph into Louisiana, her own unique variety of Black identity. Ella's transformation into Louisiana illustrates that to be Black in the U.S. is to translate, quite literally, an amnesiac American identity into a personal reality. To be an African American seems, according to Brodber, to be a hybrid multi-self, inhabiting a past collective identity as well as a modern individual identity, uniting the many pieces into one body. On page 161, Ella, who has at this point transformed to Louisiana, becomes, quote, one sound from one body, a community song, representing an array of Black cultures. Through Ella's journals and transcriptions, Brodber allows the reader to sort through the layers of what it means to be Black in America, and it is a very messy and liminal collective identity. However, while Ella is a conduit and a possession of the Venerable Sisters, her transformation is a path she chose to initially investigate and to eventually inhabit. This duality of identity present in the novel provides Louisiana with a choice. She could have remained Ella Townsend, an anthropologist and slack wearer, and returned to the recorder and completely finished her article and lived an equally successful and potentially satisfying life in Chicago. And she might have even uncovered her roots through a more typical form of research and leaned into some new form of Black identity. But instead, she chose to dig into the history of her ancestors and to investigate their homelands and to make their experiences her own. The Black man's form of anthropology seems to be inseparable from the sense of self. Louisiana is able to absorb the multi-plural Black experience because the discipline allows for the clashing, refracting, merging, and blurring of categories. This experience is described in the novel like jazz, a clash of sounds, which is not really a clash, just an almost clash. And Louisiana wonders, do they know they are making jazz?